I can see your dirty pillows. They're all gonna laugh at you. Piper Laurie as Carrie's mom. It's a classic.
I'm familiar.
Hello, Champagne Nightmares. Welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. I hope you'll stick around. Think about subscribing. Be spooky with us. But I am Janessa, and I am North Dakota's trash queen of Glam, Geek, and Gore. We are going to do another spooky themed video, and for this one, I thought it could be fun to talk a little bit about Stephen King. I thought, let's talk a little bit about how I feel about Stephen King and his writing. This channel is not a Stephen King stan account. I do like a lot of his work, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what I like, what I don't like, and I'm going to give you my top 5 recommendations for Stephen King reads that I think you must read. They're not necessarily what you think they're going to be. So if you're interested in that, then stick around, get comfortable, because we're getting into it right now. Alright, so let's talk about Stephen King. Now, I used to work at Walden Books. May she rest in peace. I was much more plugged into book culture and things that were coming out. And so a lot of my recommendations are kind of from that 10 years that I was at Walden Books. I've always been a book person, but as I get older and as my job has gotten a little bit crazier, I don't have as much time for reading as I would like. And I haven't checked out a lot of his newer stuff. But I have some thoughts. I've been reading Stephen King for a long time. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give you my top 5. And they're not necessarily what people would say necessarily are the top 5 greatest. These are just the ones that I think are really good, fun reads. So let's start by talking about Stephen King's writing style, because there are things about Stephen King that drive me bananas. So Stephen King, I think, is great at the setup. Nobody can set up a tense psychological situation like Stephen King. I think that he does such a great job, and then he shits the bed in the last third. It just happens so often. And The Mist is a great example. So that novella, The Mist, which became a movie, which has one of the darkest endings of any horror movie ever. The Mist is a great example because it's got this spooky, ghostly, very tense beginning, and you're not sure what's going on. And in the last third, it turns into this bizarre monster movie. It's like a 50s monster movie where there's purple tentacles and winged monsters that are running into the glass of the grocery store. It's a lot. So I feel like he does that a lot. I feel like he's really good at the setup, and then the follow through, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Then there are a couple of things that he does in his writing that just drive me bananas. And it needs to be said, we're going to be controversial yet brave on this channel, and we're going to say the things. I know people think you can't criticize Stephen King, but these are some things that I've noticed that just drive me bananas. The first one is that he will come up with some phrasing or something that a character says that he clearly thinks is clever. And then he will repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over and over into infinity.
From Sweden.
It will go on forever. The character, every time they see that character, somebody will be like, roly-poly Roland, or whatever, whatever it is. I can't think of any. Of course I didn't come with any examples, because that's the bitch I am. But there will be some sort of phrasing, or, tough titty said the kitty, something like that, where it'll be something that a character says, but then they'll keep saying it over and over, and it's like, okay, we get it. We thought it was clever the first time. By the 15th time, it's less clever. Another thing he does that I think is very strange is that he loves to have gross out and shocking language and things like that. He's really interested, no matter what the theme of the story is or what the actual threat or what the horror comes from, he seems very interested in the body. And so there's lots of discussion by characters about pissing and shitting and boogers and all that kind of stuff. They love to talk about going to the bathroom. They love to talk about all those kinds of things. You know, Dolores Claiborne, out of nowhere, she talks about mining for green and all this kind of stuff. They love all that stuff. And that then ties into, in the horror, there's often a lot of body horror. So like in Rose Matter, there's a scene where somebody is fighting with this guy who's like the main antagonist, and she ends up with her eye impaled on a coat hook out of nowhere. And he loves to like explain it and talk through it and give you details. And like in the book Under the Dome, the minute I heard what Under the Dome was about, it's where basically this town out of nowhere, there's suddenly a dome over top of it. And nobody knows where it came from, and it's just there, and they don't know if they're going to get out, they don't know how. The minute I heard what it was, I was like, something's going to be standing where the dome shows up, and it's going to get sliced in half. And I haven't read all of Under the Dome, but I had heard that this was there, so I had to read it. And there is a scene where there's like an animal that's like crawling, and it gets cut in half by the dome when the dome comes down. So I was like, I knew it! He's obsessed with like body, squishy, gross out sort of stuff. And so there's all that kind of detail in there. And also just like language. He loves to have a character who loves to bust out the C word. He loves to see you next Tuesday. And it's usually somebody that you would not expect. And so there's a character in Duma Key who's like this little old lady who just out of nowhere refers to this other woman as a see you next Tuesday. I'm not monetized, but I'm still not going to say it in case something like suppresses the video even more than it's being suppressed because I'm a tiny creator. But that's a rant for another day. And so he loves to work that in, and that, it gets on me because a lot of times it doesn't make sense for the character who says it. It's just got to be in there somewhere, and sometimes he doesn't really think about who's saying it, where it's like, this is like a little 80-year-old grandma woman. And I think that in that book, he was trying to show she's kind of got, I think, a brain injury. And he was trying to show that she's got these two sides. But it didn't fit with the character because it almost seemed like she had three sides. Because there was that, which was just like crass. And then there was the other stuff that she did. And then there was like the nice granny. So it was a little bit incongruous. And the last thing he does that really drives me crazy is Stephen King will telegraph an ending to you like nobody's business. Maybe not the full ending of the book, but he will tell you about events that are happening, characters that are going to die, all kinds of things way before it happens. This gets worked into so many of his stories, where somebody will be talking to a character and then there will be this like third person narrator that'll be like, if he knew that this was the last time he'd see her alive, he would have said something different. So he loves to do that kind of shit. He loves to slip something in that tells you that somebody's going to die, something bad's going to happen, always doing that kind of stuff. And here's the thing, Steve, we're going to read the fucking book. I don't need you to tell me in advance that this character is going to die, because I'm going to stick around, and it'll be much more of a surprise if you let me discover it. After all that ranting, you almost wouldn't think that I'm a Stephen King fan. But I am. I do like Stephen King. There's a lot of Stephen King works that I really, really enjoy. Some of them which are really long. Another thing that happens is that now that he's Stephen King, God forbid anybody try to go near one of his books with a red pen. And some of them, again, in the spirit of being controversial yet brave, some of them could use a little red pen. Some of them don't need 300 extra pages added back in that were edited out. The Stand, I'm looking at you. So I do like Stephen King, and there's a lot of things that I like, but even as I'm reading, I have this weird, tense love-hate relationship with him because of some of those kinds of things. So now that I've told you all about that, now that I've given you all of my gripes, I still have to say I'm a Stephen King fan. I have some books that I really love, and we're going to talk about my top 5. Sorry, nerds. Let's get this out of the way right away. This list is not going to include The Stand, It, or The Shining. I do like all three of those books. I think that they are great. I think that they've made great movie adaptations, all that kind of stuff. I am going to be one of those heathens. I think that Stanley Kubrick made some real improvements to The Shining. I think that the hedge maze is much scarier than the weird hedge creatures. I think that Jack Nicholson running around with an axe is much scarier than someone with a croquet mallet. I just think that Stanley Kubrick made some good choices and improved that. Now, killing off Catman Scruthers, not great. If you want to find out more about the trope of the sacrificial Negro, then check out my video on my Shudder faves. You'll especially want to check out the documentary section, Horror Noir. Did I say Scatman Crothers or Catman Crothers?
I thought you said Catman Crothers.
I think I did too. Now, killing off Catman Scruthers. But I think that Kubrick made some good choices. I think The Shining is great. It's a great book, but it didn't crack my top 5. I loved it, but I'm gonna say it. If you haven't read the book, if you've only seen the movies, they were very wise in what they edited out, and the weird, like, preteen gangbang that happens just comes out of nowhere. It's bizarre, and it really does take away something from that book for me. I'm sorry, nerds. That's just the way I feel. And then The Stand, the big epic. I love a post-apocalyptic. I love a dystopian. I've read it with the, 8,000 pages added back in, blah, blah, blah. I think it's great, but I've read a lot of post-apocalyptic dystopian fiction, and that one's good. That one's fine. It's great, but it's not one of my favorites by far. It's up there. It's definitely a good one, but those are just not going to be on this list. I'm sorry about it. These are maybe undiscovered classics, because I also feel like if you've read any Stephen King, a lot of people, when they read their first Stephen King, it's one of those. It's The Shining, or it's The Stand. That's where a lot of people start. So these are 5 other choices that you can make that I think are really, really good and some of Stephen King's best. Now, I say 5, but as usual, I'm a liar and a whore. Because number 5 is the 7-book Dark Tower series. It is very different from everything else that he does. It's like this sort of dystopian Western mixed with post-apocalyptic. It's very interesting. It's got magic. It's just really interesting and really fun. Now, that series is the reason why I will not start the Game of Thrones book series until all of the books are out. Fool me once, bitch. Because I started that in high school, and I didn't get to finish it until the last book came out sometime before I finished at Walden Books in 2010. So it took a long time, and we were worried that it wasn't going to. There was that accident. If you don't know, Stephen King was in a really bad car accident where he was out jogging and this van just hit him. And he still had 3 books to write, and those of us who had been following the Dark Tower series for decades, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? This is gonna get bad. Now, I do have to say, a lot of people struggle with the Dark Tower series, and they tend to struggle either with book 1, but if they can get through book 1, they struggle with book 4. And I will tell you that's absolutely normal. That's what a lot of people experience. And that's because the main character of Roland the Gunslinger is kind of the least interesting character in the book. His world is very interesting, and the people around him is very interesting, and the history is very interesting, but it doesn't really get more fast-paced and more interesting until the second book, which is called The Drawing of the Three, where he starts bringing other characters to him. So he's on this quest. It starts with he's chasing this man in black, and you get one other side character. You get this boy named Jake who shows up for a while. But in the second book, you get Susanna and Eddie, and Jake comes back, and there's this little Billy Bumbler, which is this weird animal from the world that he lives in. And it just becomes much more interesting. You get more of the lore, you get more of the mythology. The first book is mercifully the shortest. Now, this one has also been released with new material added back in that was edited out that really didn't need to be there, but it's the shortest book. So if you just are if you're I don't know, this is kind of slow, it's kind of dull, power through and get to The Drawing of the Three, because that one of the whole series is my favorite book. I love the side characters of Eddie and Susanna so much better than Roland. So check that out. And then the fourth book, the reason why that's another struggle is because it doesn't focus on Roland and Eddie and Susanna and Jake. It focuses on Roland when he was a kid, when he was younger. And you meet some of his other friends that he's talked about as being dead throughout the whole thing. So it's a little bit slower. It goes back in time. It's more Roland focused. So power through 1 and 4, and then I promise you that you'll love it. I loved it. I thought it was great. Now, I also have to say that as I was getting into the later books, another thing that can happen with Stephen King is that I'm so fascinated by the characters, and I'm so fascinated by the setup, that sometimes I find myself getting more and more frustrated with the actual events, because the idea of them is so good. And I do have to say that there are some things in those last 3 books that get a little out there. So you're going to have to, again, put on your skeptic's hat and just enjoy it. Enjoy the characters. Because Stephen King puts himself in as a character. And Stephen King has always been self-referential, but he gets extra self-referential where he appears in the book and everything ties together with all of his work. It's a lot. But stick it out, and I think you'll really be impressed with the ending. In the number 4 spot, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I love Rose Madder. And this is about a woman who's in an abusive relationship, and she leaves her ex-husband, and she goes on the run, and she's in hiding from him, and he is chasing after her, and she finds this painting. And it's been a while since I've read it, so I can't remember if she got it at a thrift store, or if she finds it at this place where she goes to stay. But there's this picture of a woman in kind of Grecian robes, and every time she looks at the picture, it changes, and she kind of goes into the picture, and she's sort of living that life. And her ex-husband, the abuser, becomes this minotaur figure, and he becomes this monster. And there's some really interesting themes that are explored. It's kind of weirdly supernatural, and I love the kind of play with the character in the painting versus Rose, the main character. I just think it's a lot of fun. It's not one of his more well-known. It's not one of his more popular. But I think it's really, really good. And I think the issues of abuse that are brought in and trauma and what it means to deal with that and what it means to put that behind you and to try to put it behind you when your abuser is still pursuing you. I just think it's really well done. I think it's really good. Now, I mentioned earlier that Stephen King is at his best when he's got a firm editing hand nearby, and I think that he's really good at the short form. And that's why my number 3 pick is the short story collection, Night Shift. Now, that one has a lot of the stories that were adapted into this anthology horror film called Cat's Eye that had young Drew Barrymore in it. And one that I really remember is Quitters Incorporated. And it's this guy who checks into this, like, he's trying to stop smoking, and he joins this thing called Quitters Incorporated, and it's really extreme what they do, where, like, they'll cut off your wife's pinky finger, and they'll, like, torture your family if you don't meet your goals, and they're, like, spying on you. They have all these people who infiltrate your world, and you never know who's watching you and who's reporting back, and it's this really tight, really wonderful paranoia horror that I just think is great. Also, I think some of the stories that were in the Creepshow movies. I love anthology horror. Let me know down in the comments below. I'm thinking about doing a video on some of my favorite anthology horror movies. I did include in that Shudder video that I mentioned earlier, I did include some recommendations from Shudder, but if you want a whole video on non-Shudder specific anthology horrors, let me know. But from Creepshow, I think some of those were in there, like The Raft might be in there. But I love Night Shift. I just remember thinking that that one had some really great stories in it. I love a good scary short story. And in my number 2 spot, Stephen King has certain types of horror that he does. So he does, like, alien horror, which is like the Tommyknockers and Under the Dome, and there's a few others like that. And then he does the, like, creature horror, which is like It and, you know, other things like that. The Dreamcatchers is one of the alien ones. He does kind of these types that are very similar. And one that I really like is when he does a ghost story. his ghost stories are very spooky because, again, he's really good at that psychological setup of bringing that in. With a ghost, it becomes much more about that haunting, that kind of experience, than about a monster that comes in. So I love it. Bag of Bones is a great one, but for the number 2 spot, I had to put in Doomakey. And this is another one that I think a lot of people forgot about, that they don't really think about. I loved Doomakey. And this was one that was set in Florida, and it's kind of a fun ghost story. And it's just a really interesting take on that sort of ghost story. Somebody who has had a tragic accident and he's trying to rebuild his life, and he sets up down in Florida, and he encounters all of this sort of haunting kind of activity that's going on around him. I think it's fabulous. I love it. If you can find Doomakey, it might be out of print, but if you can find it, I say give it a shot. And in my number 1 spot, they're all gonna laugh at you. I love Carrie. I think that Carrie is so good. It's one of his first books. I think it might have been the first that he ever got published, the first full-length novel that he got published. And it's still the best. It's still really tightly plotted. It really speaks to a lot of things that we're still grappling with. I mean, I remember when the Columbine shooting happened, and they re-released a copy of Carrie with a very different cover. So, like, they had been re-releasing Stephen King books with this very, like, typical set of covers. But after Columbine, they did a very different cover for Carrie and made it look like a lot of the young adult novels at that time. And he wrote a new introduction for that version that talked about how he was inspired by these 2 girls that he had gone to school with who were bullied, and that he said he wanted to give them a way to fight back. He didn't know whatever happened to them. He didn't know if they turned out okay, and he wanted to, like, write a story that would give them a way to have vengeance. And that's what I love about that book, because I love the movie. I actually like both movies. I know that's, like, heretical to say that you like the remake with Chloe Grace Moretz and Julianne Moore. I liked both of them. I think that you can like a remake and still like the original. There's a lot of love in the world. You don't have to limit yourself. I like them both, but what I love about the book is that Carrie knows that she's got some power. So in the original film, which is good, it's great, Sissy Spacek is amazing. But Sissy Spacek's Carrie is a victim. She absolutely gets that blood dumped on her, and she's just a victim. She just reacts. There's no thought behind it. In the book, Carrie gets covered in the blood. She leaves the prom, and as she's leaving, she's getting more and more angry. And think about it, she's like, those people keep laughing at me. They keep doing this. Why do they do this? Why do they hurt me? And she goes back to the prom. It's a conscious choice. She goes back. She traps everyone inside and starts the place on fire. So it really is Carrie taking her agency. She's really taking control and saying, I'm gonna fuck these people up. And it's glorious. And you see her, like, practicing with her powers earlier. And it's not something, like, she's scared of it, but she's also figuring out, like, I could hurt people with this. Like, this is something, I could hurt people with this. And the way that she kills her mother in the book is so scary. I know I'm giving it all away, so if you haven't read it, I'm, like, telling you all the plot points, but every single video that I make is a spoiler, so just get used to it. I love that when she kills her mother, in the film, it's cinematic and beautiful to nail her to the wall with knives in that crucifixion look. It absolutely makes sense. But in the book, it's so much creepier. Because she's talking to her mother very, like, softly, and she's like, I can see your heart, Mama. I can see it slowing down, and it's getting slower and slower. And she kills her by slowly stopping her heart and telling her the whole time, this is what I'm doing. I'm tired of you abusing me. I'm tired of you meting out these punishments that don't make any sense, hurting me for no reason, and I'm gonna make you pay. And it's so creepy. And what I really love about the story of Carrie is that if you stop Carrie right before the blood, it's like the worst, cheesiest ABC after-school special ever. Because it's just like, oh, there's this kind of downtrodden mousy girl who's teased by all of her classmates. Oh, isn't this terrible? And some popular girl at school is like, I feel bad. I was mean to her. I'm going to get my popular, handsome football boyfriend to ask her to prom. And he asks her to prom, and she makes her own dress, and she looks beautiful, and she gets to the prom, and everybody's like, you made that? That's amazing. You look great, Carrie. You're wonderful. And then she gets voted prom queen. If it wasn't for the blood, like, that's a terrible movie. That's such a bad, like, lessons learned, let's hug and cry and learn and grow kind of bullshit movie. And then the pig's blood happens, and the chaos, and the death, and the destruction, and it is glorious. So I love Carrie. I love Carrie for that, because it really just subverts your expectations of this is going to be the mousy girl finally gets her day. You know, for every movie, every teen movie that we've seen where some hot actress wears a pair of overalls and puts on a pair of glasses and has her hair in a ponytail, and then she like shakes out the ponytail and takes off her glasses and she's gorgeous, and they're like, oh my god, we never knew. And it's like, bitch, we all knew. Everybody knew. It's like that. It's that kind of story, and then it just goes so delightfully, deliciously wrong. So absolutely, it's so well written. It's much tighter. It's much faster. It's a much faster read. I absolutely think if you don't read any other Stephen King, you should read Carrie. All right, that is the video. That's my top 5 Stephen King hidden gems that you need to check out, as well as my thoughts on Stephen King as a writer. Again, I think so many times the people who make content about a creator are like the stans, the people who love everything, that think the person can do no wrong. And I'm like, here's the deal. I have this kind of complicated love-hate relationship with Stephen King, but it's enough love that it keeps me coming back. I've read a lot of Stephen King. I haven't read a lot of his newer stuff, but that's just because I haven't had as much time for reading in general. I think it's fun. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments below if you have a favorite Stephen King, especially if you read newer Stephen King. Let me know what's good to check out of his newer stuff, because I would love to read some of the newer stuff. I watched the film version of Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. I thought that was great, so I would maybe pick that up. Let me know if there are other ones, especially ghost stories that you think are really great. Anything that you think would be really fun, in the vein of the ones I've already talked about, or just ones that you really liked. While you're down there, don't forget to give me that thumbs up. Or if you're like, how could you badmouth the king? He's the king of horror. He can do no wrong. Give me that thumbs down. I will take it. It's all engagement. The algorithm isn't a picky bitch, and neither am I. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads. I upload at least 2 videos a week, and if you're lucky, you might even get a bonus video. Ooh, spooky. And if you'd like to chat, banter, or commiserate between uploads, all of my social media will be linked down in the description box below, including a link to my website, version 3.0, The World of Champagne, at janessajay.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love and appreciate all of my little boils and ghouls and zombies. Did we ever decide if that was okay? Do we like zombies? And I love and appreciate all of you, and I am so excited to have you here for another horror video. And until I see you again, bye. And now that I'm talking about it, I kind of wish I had talked about Cell. Cell's a good one too. Maybe that's number 6. Ignore me. Now, killing off Catman Scruthers. But I really do. Did I say Scatman Crothers or Catman Crothers?
I thought you said Catman Crothers.
I think I did too. Now, killing Catman... Fuck! I did it again. Now, killing Scatman Crothers in... now I can't even say it.